In November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion German marks, a number so insane that workers needed a wheelbarrow to carry their daily salary home, the worst hyperinflation ever recorded in history. Germany's tragedy started with war debt. After World War I, the Weimar Republic owed 132 billion gold marks in reparations, more than its entire economy could produce, forcing endless printing. The Reichsbank's printing presses ran 24 hours a day in 1923, producing 1783 machines that created mountains of paper so fast that ink could not dry before being spent on bread. By mid-1923, prices doubled every 3.7 days in Berlin. A loaf that cost 250 marks in January cost 200 billion by November, changing price tags hourly in every bakery across Germany. Children built forts from worthless banknotes because paper was cheaper than wood. Kids in Berlin used 1 billion mark notes as kites because the paper was worth less than string itself. Workers demanded to be paid twice a day in Weimar, Germany. A factory worker in Essen got salary at 11 a.m., rushed to buy bread, then got paid again at 4 p.m. before prices rose again. Shops stopped counting money and started weighing it on scales. In 1923, a Berlin grocer weighed a basket of marks instead of counting because counting trillions took longer than bread stayed fresh. Reichsbank vaults overflowed with paper worth nothing. In November 1923, the bank had 300 paper mills and 2,000 presses, but not enough gold to buy a single loaf of bread for workers. Families gathered around kitchen tables to count billions. In Munich, a mother counted 14 billion marks to buy milk for her children, a task that took 2 hours every single morning. People burned money to stay warm because it was cheaper than firewood. In 1923, a German family burned 1 trillion marks in their stove because paper heated more than money could buy coal. A cup of coffee in Berlin cost 5,000 marks in January, 100,000 in July, and 14 billion by November. Cafes printed new menus every hour, crossing out old prices with shaking hands daily. Factories paid workers twice daily with wheelbarrows. In the Ruhr, a steel worker pushed 50 billion marks home, only to find bread cost 80 billion by dinner time that same evening. The mark collapsed against the dollar from 8.9 per dollar in 1919 to 4.2 trillion by November 15, 1923. A chart of the collapse looks like a cliff, straight down to zero in months. Farmers refused paper and demanded barter. In Bavaria, a farmer traded 2 eggs for 1 billion marks, then used the cash to wallpaper his barn because it was cheaper than paint. Berlin kids played with cash like toys. In 1923, children in Kreuzberg made kites from 10 billion mark notes. Because the string cost more than the banknote, they flew in wind. Clerks stamped zeros onto old notes. The Reichsbank took a 1,000 mark note and stamped 1 billion on it, because printing new notes took too long to keep up with hyperinflation. Mothers carried laundry baskets of cash to buy bread. In November 1923, a Berlin mother pushed a basket with 80 billion marks to the bakery, but thieves stole the basket and left money. Bank vaults stood empty, filled with cobwebs. By late 1923, German banks had no gold, no silver, only paper that lost 50% of its value between lunch and dinner every day. Weimar politicians promised the printing would stop, but kept printing. Finance Minister Rudolf Havenstein said Reichsbank would stop, then ordered 30 more printing presses the same day in Berlin. Wheelbarrows full of cash were abandoned in streets. In Berlin, people left wheelbarrows of marks on sidewalks because the metal wheelbarrow was worth more than the paper it carried inside. Berlin's stock market panicked as the mark died. Traders in 1923 shouted prices that changed every minute because a stock worth 10 billion at 10 a.m. was worth 12 billion by 10:15. Families wallpapered walls with banknotes. In Essen, a family pasted 1 million mark notes on their living room wall because it was cheaper than buying wallpaper at 50 billion per roll. The Reichsbank governor's office was buried in paper. Hevenstein's desk in 1923 was covered with 500 billion mark notes, stacked so high he could not see his visitors across desk. Governments weighed money instead of counting it. A Berlin butcher in November 1923 put a customer's 200 billion marks on a scale, charging by weight, not by number, because counting took too long. Street cleaners swept banknotes from gutters. In Berlin, children watched as city workers swept billions of worthless marks from streets, where wind blew them like autumn leaves in November 1923. Printing presses never stopped, day and night. In Leipzig, 300 paper mills ran non-stop in November 1923, producing 400 quintillion marks daily, more zeros than anyone could comprehend or count. Savings books became worthless overnight. A German who saved 100,000 marks in 1918, enough to buy a house, found in 1923 it could not buy a single egg at the market anymore. Today, an Ohio family sees the same warning. When the U.S. prints $4 trillion in 2 years and groceries rise 40%, the lesson from Weimar 1923 is that paper always dies, but gold survives. In 2008, Wall Street printed like Weimar tar. The Federal Reserve created $3.5 trillion out of thin air, just as the Reichsbank did in 1923, proving that every government chooses printing press over pay. The Weimar rule endures for every American portfolio. Own what you cannot print, like gold, land, and skills. Keep cash low, assets real, and remember that when a government says inflation is temporary, check your wheelbarrow.